Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In Section 5 of David Hume's Enquiry Concerning Human Understanding, after bringing up the issue of belief and what belief is and how the sentiment or feeling of belief is so important to it and makes it different than fancies or fictions, which are the action of the imagination, things that we actually do believe in. What is it that we feel or think when we're believing in something? He then talks about the different principles or modes of association. And now he's already been discussing one at great length in this section, which was about cause and effect. And he said that it's really reducible to constant or customary conjunction, and he's defined the nature of custom or habit in producing belief. But then he asks, well, what about other kinds? So what are the principles of connection or association? He says we can reduce these to three: resemblance, contiguity, and causation. And he tells us these are the only bonds that unite our thoughts together and beget that regular train of reflection or discourse which in a greater or lesser degree takes place among all humankind. So these are the three main ways in which we connect our ideas together and move from one, which is present, to another, which is absent, bringing them into, you could say, our purview. And these are all about what Hume calls matters of fact. So do these, he says, provide belief? He asks, does it happen in all these relations that when one of the objects is presented to the senses or memory, the mind is not only carried to the conception of the correlative, but reaches a steadier and stronger conception of it than what otherwise it would have been able to attain? Steadier and stronger conception is one of the ways in which he has characterized the feeling or sentiment of belief in the truth or reality of that thing. So he says, this seems to be the case with that belief which arises from the relation of cause and effect. But can it be the same with other relations or principles of association? If so, he says, this may be established as a general law which takes place in all the operations of the mind. What would that mean? Not only that we have belief going on, but that we have this force of custom or habit taking place in relation of resemblance and contiguity as well as causation. So this is a very important transition. And Hume examines this by considering some examples. And we might come up with many other examples on our own. But I think for the time being, we should just look at his. So he says, our first experiment, the appearance of the picture of an absent friend. Our idea of this person is evidently enlivened by the resemblance, and that every passion which that idea occasions, whether of joy or sorrow, acquires new force and vigor. In producing this effect, he says, there occur both a relation and a present impression. What's the present impression? Looking at the picture. And we don't necessarily need to have, like a snapshot that we keep on our desk, although people do that, right? And why do people keep pictures of their loved ones on their desk? Or their dogs and cats, which could be loved ones as well, right? So that they can be reminded. So there we have the impression, right? And then we have the relation. And what is the relation? The relation is that of resemblance. The image resembles the person. And this is why, this is a side note, we can have such discordant experiences, like, for example, you bring somebody in and you've got an old picture of them, and you're like, you don't look anything like your picture. Well, there's a lack of resemblance there. They've gained weight, they've lost weight, their hair has turned white, they had a beard, they've shaved it off, they're wearing a cowboy hat, whatever it happens to be. Right? Resemblance is something that we are looking for there. So that can produce not only this understanding that there's a connection between these things, but also sentiments in ourselves. So we look at a picture of the person who we love, or the friend, or somebody like that, and then we feel warm fuzzies. Unless maybe it's a picture of them being devoured by a lion, and then we feel bad, we feel sad, right? We could have pictures of our enemies and look at them and be like, ooh, angry, hatred, right? Any of these are possible. We could even have pictures of somebody who's boring and leaves us feeling kind of blasé, and we look at it and we're like, yeah, that's that person, That would totally make sense. So he says, in producing this effect, there's a relation and a present impression. Where the picture bears the person no resemblance, at least was not intended for him, it never so much as conveys our thought to that person. So, think about bad drawings, right? We have our kids in school make drawings of mommy and daddy and whoever else, right? And it's basically like a bubble head with two eyes and a mouth and a nose and stick figure things. And we know, because the kid has told us, well, that's mommy, that's daddy, that's little, Susan over there, that's the dog Rover, that what these things are supposed to represent. But if you were to take somebody else's kids' pictures and put them in front of you and be like, any resemblance there? You'd be like, resemblance to what? Other ball-headed, skinny stick figures? I don't know any of them in real life. What is this supposed to be? Right? So if the image doesn't convey an adequate resemblance, it's not going to have this connection that draws us from the image to the thing. So he says, where the image is absent as well as the person, though the mind may pass from the thought of one to the other, it feels the idea to be rather weakened rather than enlivened. We take a pleasure in viewing the picture of a friend when it is set before us, but when it is removed, we choose to consider them directly rather than by reflection on an image which is equally distant and obscure. And this is something that we can think about even more in our incredibly image-rich world of social media and streaming video and all these other things at the time. He also talks about religious ceremonies. Hume likes to pick on the Roman Catholics being in Scotland at the time, where the Presbyterians are the establishment and the rest of England is more or less against the Roman Catholics within Ireland and a bit in Scotland and England, but mostly in other countries like Spain and Italy. He has a ready audience for that sort of thing, and he talks about the ceremonies of the Roman Catholic religion. What are they doing there? He says the devotees of that superstition usually plead an excuse for the mummeries with which they are upbraided, that they feel the good effect of those external motions and postures and actions in what? Enlivening their devotion and quickening their fervor. So the idea is that by engaging in the rituals, and we could apply this to just about anybody, you connect those rituals by resemblance to whatever it is that you're supposed to be keeping in mind, right? It could be like having a relationship with some divine person or object or principle, and we don't need to go further, but you see how that would work. So resemblance clearly does provide belief, right? This stronger sensation than mere fiction. What about contiguity? Contiguity is being connected in space and time. So he has a really great example here. He says, considering the effects of contiguity, it is certain that distance diminishes the force of every idea, and upon our approach to any object, though it does not discover itself to our senses, it operates on the mind with an influence which imitates an immediate impression. So what is he saying there? We're moving along in space and time. As we get closer to something that we can't yet see or experience, but we see things that are connected to it in space and time, our mind is drawn to that, and it can have an effect on us. We might, feel fearful getting closer to home, or we might feel joyful, or whatever it is. And we could think of other things too, like getting closer to school, like you're driving along, and if you don't particularly like being, say, in high school, and you see the streets that are like coming up to it, and you're like, ah, crap, another day of drudgery here in this high school. Or if you really enjoy being in school, you might be riding along, and it's raining, but you can still make out that you're getting closer, and you're like, yay, school time, so wonderful, right? And this is part of what goes on when we take trips. So he says that, here we go. The thinking on any object readily transports the mind to what is contiguous, what is connected to it in space and time, but it is only the actual presence of an object that transports it with superior vivacity. When I am a few miles from home, whatever relates to it touches me more nearly than when I am 200 leagues distant, that's 600 miles, though even at that distance, the reflecting on anything in the neighborhood of my friends or family naturally produces an idea of them. But in the latter case, where I'm imagining it, there's an easy transition between them. That transition alone is not able to give a superior vivacity for want of some immediate impression. Right? So as I'm actually getting closer to home and seeing things and smelling the air of home, I am more drawn to it. And I'll tell you about an experience that I had that was quite interesting along those lines. So when we were coming back from spring break, some early April, from Florida to Wisconsin, we would take a very long route. It was about 24 hours drive to get from where we were in Florida up to where we were in Wisconsin. As we're passing through northwestern Indiana, things started to become dead. We transitioned from a space of clear spring and even like getting ready for summer in the south, what's summer to us in the north, right? To things being gray and brown and drab and tan. Nothing was fully in green bloom as we went further and further north, right? And it was interesting because as we did that, I remember thinking to myself, we're home. We're still 2 states away, but that's the way things were for the most part at that time of year in my home. And so seeing that drab, dreary landscape filled me with a sort of joy that being in the South and, seeing everything green didn't. So it's clear that resemblance and continuity both help to produce the vivacity of belief in their, what Hume calls, connected or conjuncted items or ideas. He points out a really key feature here. He says that we may observe in these phenomena the belief of the correlative object is always presupposed. Without that, the relation could have no effect. So, if I don't have some actual friend who could have died but existed at some time to have a picture of, then that picture is not going to have the effect. It'll have some effect, but it won't have the effect, the same effect that this connection of belief does, right? So when we put together pictures of people who we don't know, or we're watching movies of people who we don't actually, we kind of lend credence to the existence of the character, but we're not completely, right? It's not the same thing as seeing a documentary like, holy crap, look at what happened to those people. There's a difference for Hume between those. And he says that the influence of the picture supposes we believe our friend to have once existed. Contiguity to home can never excite our ideas of home unless we believe that home really exists or existed as well. I mean, I can have all sorts of beliefs about things in my childhood home which are no longer there in the present. The hill behind our house that we used to play on all the time, it's been cut down, right? The house has been put on it. The meadows where we used to play as kids, all gone as well, been turned into a subdivision as the farmer sold off the land. But it did once actually exist. So we can have that vivacity. And we can think of it this way. You need to have at least some belief content or energy or feeling in order to get it anywhere else. once you've got it, then you can work with it in that system. And he has some examples here that are kind of nice. Dry wood, he says, when I throw a piece of dry wood into a fire, my mind is immediately carried to conceive that it augments, not extinguishes the flame, right? The transition of thought from the cause to the effect proceeds not from reason. It derives its origin from custom and experience, and we could say that belief is active in all of this, unless you've never actually done anything with a campfire, in which case you don't actually have that until you get a little bit of experience putting wood in the fire. And he talks about a sword and a wound. You don't necessarily have to have had the experience of somebody poking you with a sword. You've probably been punctured by something else at some other time that drew blood, and you can say, oh man, this is an even bigger needle. I'd better watch out for that. So all three of these principles of association are active in how we move from one thing that we have belief in to another thing that we then can have belief in, or vice versa. And all three of them are going to be absolutely integral in how we understand what Hume is calling matters of fact, things in the world, things that have to do with our own emotions or passions, and things that have to do with our relations with other people.